Good evening, everyone. So for the last day of, what I've decided to call Analog Week, in which I've shown two analog radios, I'm going to show a digital radio, but one that looks like an analog radio. This is my XHData D-328. The current sort of version of this line that people seem to like is the D-328, which is a more recent version. This is a year or two old that I've had it. It was the big cheap radio news at that time. I think I paid about $20 Canadian for it, and you shouldn't pay much more than that if you find one. But it's a fun little radio. It's surprisingly good, and I'll talk a little bit about it. But what I really want to do is turn it on now, and turn it on. You'll notice it has an MP3 playback, and it does charge a lithium battery, but the MP3 playback is a pretty good hint that it's not digital. So what I'm going to do is I won't talk about individual stations that we're looking at. We're set for band 2 here. The bands are a bit odd sometimes on this, but band 2 is the 49 meter band here. And we'll listen to that, and then we'll compare it with the Grundig, because I've still got it out. So I'll turn it up and listen what happens when I tune it. I'll turn it up some more so you can hear that. Hear the tick, 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 tick. So what it is it's a digital tuner, and this dial is connected to a potentiometer, which is controlling where the digital tuner is tuned. It actually works very well on this radio. But you see, it's weird. It's got all kinds of artifacts as you tune around. And things drop in and out as
for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Normally a chiasmus in scripture is lined up.
Unfortunately, my heat just turned on.
And the chiasmus.
So there's NHK Radio Japan. There's surprising bass in this little case. So, I mean, so you can get some idea of what the artifacts are when you tune around with a radio like this. When you compare it to the Grundig, which is from the 90s and therefore known to be analog, and we turn it on. We also have a 49 meter band.
Exprésate con arte. Recuerden que nos pueden escuchar por las ondas de Radio Martí y por el...
I see. Anyway, so there's radio. There's Japan again. But the point is, you can see how different they sound when you tune. I'll just go back to the XHData again. So listen to, I'll turn it up. Here, tick, 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 tick. That's a pretty good night, actually. Might have to do some more poking around. Might have to get out the bigger tech then. But since we'll be sticking with analog radios tonight. But as you can see, it looks like an analog radio. you got a band switch. In some ways it acts like an analog radio, but it sure isn't an analog radio. And I think the analog radios are much to be preferred. And you know, this is, I would say, a $20 or $30 radio. If you get it at a decent price, you shouldn't be paying much more than that for one of these. But you can get a number of analog Texans that are real analog radios and perform. I mean, I don't own one at the moment, but I bought one for my father, and performed very similarly to this Grundig, and they're not any more expensive. So you could have a real analog radio. In some ways, the performance of this thing is really kind of neat. I've taken a video or two from my office where it just leaned up against the window. It manages to pull in a little bit of daytime shortwave. But so I wouldn't say I'm be the last person to say don't buy a cheap radio that works. Don't buy a cheap radio that works, but don't buy it thinking it's an analog radio, because you'll be disappointed. You know, instead either look for something vintage, or more likely spend no more money and get one of the analog Texans. There are a couple of other Chinese manufacturers that are still making analog multi-band radios. Okay, well, hope that was interesting. I think probably most people who, sorry for the wiggly camera, most people who watch this channel are probably aware of this, but just in case you aren't, you know, not analog, looks analog. Good night.